Yes, Shalom Rastafari, scenes, greetings, and welcome, friends. So, every human being everywhere has certain inalienable human rights and responsibilities. Now, that being the case, very practically, even as right now, you see me? I'm walking around town, right? So, the ideal operational mode for every person is quite simply to know their human rights and responsibilities, know your human rights and responsibilities, and be conscious of the law, think about the law, and have the law on your mind, whether it's God's law, international human rights law, and other laws that are lawful. Because, you see, it's almost as if, okay, from a Rastafari perspective, we have to be like a perfect judge, advocate, general for U.D.H.R Rastafari. First of all, being strapped with the Holy Bible, the Holy Torah, God's law. Then, because we're also human beings, as is everybody else, you also have to be strapped with international human rights law. Now, this being the case, right, you are able to operate, to walk, to live lawfully, and ultimately we have to become legal and legitimate doers of the law. Because, you see, let me give you an example. There's a street over there. There's traffic laws over there, right? There's a waterway over there. There's probably environmental protection laws that apply to that area down there where these birds like to nest, yeah? And so on and so forth. The key, though, to living a happy and a free and a safe life, and even operating with a certain amount of definite and rightfully due sovereignty, is to be a student of the law. You have to be a law student. Every human being is a member of the United Nations. And so you have to have a certain amount of knowledge of the law so that you can lawfully take the law into your own hands and practice it legally, and also use it to defend your human rights and freedoms. So this is comparable to somebody being like a sheriff. A human being has human rights and responsibilities and becomes like a human rights, human law enforcement body. Because at this time in 2023, it's much too complicated and ineffective based on the technical struggling and or potential failure of the United Nations to file a complaint about human rights violations and hope that somebody else, some suit and tie in some office building somewhere is going to take care of it for you. It's not effective enough. It's not an effective remedy. So we have to be the very ones as human beings with inalienable human rights and responsibilities that actually enforce the law ourselves in accordance with the law. And that's completely legit. Because you see, okay, let me explain this to you. If you know your human rights and responsibilities, somebody tries to violate your human rights, and you know your human rights, you can defend them in that situation immediately, right there, in that very moment, at that very moment. And at that point, you're actually achieving the greatest objective: to maintain international human rights law and order, to keep the peace, and to be a peacemaker, and to serve your fellow human beings, and to free humanity, to create a perfect world, a peaceful world, to manifest world peace and collective security right there at that very instant. So that's the thing now. Because, see, I myself have considered filing complaints or seeking legal remedy for different instances where my human rights were challenged and or violated by different individuals, whether governments or school teachers, etc. Yet, actually, you know how long that's going to take to do that? And, you know, there is a right to self-defense. There's actually a right to resist also. We got to talk about the right to resist for a second. Because the right to resist was classified as some by the ultimate human right. Now, there is not actually an article in the U.D.H.R. that's titled "The Right to Resist." There's not actually an article anywhere called "The Right to Resistance" or something like that. The right to resist is a legal subject. And from what I've been able to research so far, it's based on human rights. And the closest thing that I can find to support the right to resist is Article 1 of the U.D.H.R. In Article 30, and also, if I'm correct, Article 28, and definitely other articles too. In fact, the entire document supports the right to resist that what is illegal. Now, there's a saying in jurisprudence called, "That what is legal must not yield to that what is illegal." So that what is lawful must not yield to that what is unlawful. So in other words, that what is legal and legit automatically triumphs over what is illegal and illegit. Okay, knowing that, we got to touch on the right to resist, because at this time, based on the amount of illegal activity, let's say within the United Nations, including all the world's governments and nation states right now, because of all these human rights violations going on everywhere, and the fact that the human rights law enforcement body is actually the entire United Nations, including every individual, including myself, ideally, you would become a legal practitioner of human rights. You would become a legal practitioner. You would become someone who actually exercises and practices their human rights and responsibilities at all times. Because, as I explained, if I know the law, I can do the law. If I know the law, I can take the law into my own hands. And then I can walk lawfully, triumph legally, maintain legality on all levels permanently. That's the way to do it. So, the right to resist. The right to resist. I'm going to explain this first very simply, because I've done some reading, and to make this comprehensible for the general public as easily as possible, the right to resist basically is that you have certain inalienable human rights and other rights that come from laws that were made or that exist at the United Nations, within the U.D.H.R., within the UN Charter. For example, the right to self-determination, human rights, and also different laws or constitutional laws that exist within the national constitutions of different countries, like, for example, the United States of America, the USA Constitution, Second Amendment, First Amendment, etc., etc., etc. Now, the right to resist is legally practiced and rightfully exercised within the following scenario. You're operating legally, engaged in legal activity, whether it's human rights work or whatever you're doing, as long as it's legal, according to various different laws, you have the right of way. You have the legal right of way. Exactly. And if somebody tries to stop you or hinder you from freely exercising your human rights or your constitutional rights, etc., 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 then you have a right to resist that illegal activity, whatever it may be, by practicing that what is legal, and therefore automatically legally triumph over whatever injustice with justice. So you become a server of justice. Now that has to be done lawfully, though. So let me give an example of this. Prime example is if the law enforcement of any particular nation stop you, check your ID, and they ask you questions. If they ask you something that is an invasion into your privacy, for example, your right to privacy, that's also in the U.D.H.R. It's a human right. Basically, the right to privacy. You are allowed to exercise your rights and your human right that's, defined in the U.D.H.R. and to safeguard your privacy by, for example, referring to the law, explaining that you're, referring to this law, maybe even show them a copy, or everybody here is working for the greater good. So we got to have peaceful and legit interactions with all of each other. And then shall the Son of Man seek peace with all men. Okay? Now the way to do that is you just exercise the law, state the law. Somebody asks you a question, and that question is invasive into your privacy or your private affairs. You do not have to answer them because you have a right to privacy. So you just, say, I'm hereby reserving the right to remain silent based on article so-and-so of this and that document, period. There you go. That's it. That's how it could be done. Now, in retrospect, in my life experience, I've actually done this before, basically speaking. I've done the right thing, and that was recognized by law enforcement too, because they saw, according to my point of view, that I'm engaged in legal activity and seeking to maintain a legal status on all levels. So that's how easy it is. Every human being has inalienable human rights and responsibilities and has to freely, rightfully exercise those. That's it. I'll give you another example of this. There's a thing called freedom of movement. You have freedom of movement. According to international law, international human rights law, especially an article in the U.D.H.R., every person has the right to cross the borders of every existing state and to reside in and to leave whatever country they please. You could basically go anywhere and live anywhere legally, according to international human rights law, according to the U.D.H.R. So how would this work on a practical level? Well, thank God there is such a thing as safety and security. And in these times, there's a necessity for law enforcement, border safety, etc. So if I'm going from one country into another, and they say, well, blah, 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 visa, blah, 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 whatever. Like, you get the picture? Your visa to live and work and to reside in any country in the world is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And you have to state that fact at the appropriate time, if necessary. Now, if you do this in a country, and if you do all of what I was just explaining in a country that is signatory to the U.D.H.R, for example, if you practice international human rights law in any country that is signatory, that is signed or adopted, formally adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, you have the legal right of way, and that what is legal must not yield before that what is illegal. But you do have to pay attention to make sure that, here, how about this? I recommend that you only go to countries, whoever you are, wherever you're from, only go to countries that have signed the U.D.H.R. Because if you're in a country that is not signatory to the U.D.H.R, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, then that presents a problem. You would have to exercise other laws to get through. And there may be other laws in those countries that are good too, but what you have to do is, you do have to pay attention to the context of this. So, if I go to America has signed the U.D.H.R. I can practice and enjoy and exercise my human rights and responsibilities there freely because the nation state within whose boundaries I'm operating with due regard to international law and local law is a signee to, the U.D.H.R. or this constitution or this set of laws, etc. You just have to pay attention to that, because if you were to go to a country, heaven forbid, that is not a signatory, that didn't sign on with, that didn't agree to adopt international human rights law, then technically it wouldn't really be in effect in that country, within that country's borders. So you do have to pay attention to where you're going and what you're doing, and pay attention to the legal situation in any environment that you're in. And you know what? At this point, I actually have a suggestion to make to my fellow human beings. If you're in a country right now that is not signatory, that didn't adopt the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or that's not a member of the United Nations, you may consider leaving that country because of the fact that it is better to live in a country that has adopted the U.D.H.R. and other international legal framework to guarantee a good, happy, safe, and free life for every human being everywhere. That's actually a recommendation I have to make. So really, at the end of the day, you just print out a copy of the U.D.H.R., you keep it with you, have a copy of the document on your phone, and if necessary, pull up the information, interact peacefully and brotherly with everybody as much as possible, because it says in the U.D.H.R. that, we should interact, we should be like brothers. All of humanity should be like brothers with each other. Treat each other like brothers. There we go. That's good. So now you know that. Now you can use it and do it. You have to do it yourself. But now, to do it yourself, you have to know how to do it legally, and I did explain that. If I have an instructions manual with me, and I would like to build something, I have to use the instructions from the manual and I can build it. So that's how you do it. Have a nice day.